Hi, Dad! Hello, everyone, and welcome to Weary Lore. Happy Halloween! Today, we're going to do something a little different. We're going to have a spooky story read-along. This is a subscriber request. I will be reading 2 spooky stories that you may or may not have seen on No Sleep. This subscriber requested 2 very specific stories because they were written by yours truly. Yes, these are a couple spooky stories that I wrote about a decade ago. I feel that I have become a better storyteller since these were written, but I'm going to read them as they were written all those years ago. So, grab yourself a cozy drink and get comfortable as we delve into the spooky recesses of my own mind. Let's get into it. The Strange Roads of Small Town America. Every little town has one, the haunted road that everyone claims to avoid. But really, they go to it every night trying to have their own experience. There are some famous ones where entire carloads of people disappear under covered bridges, or children push stalled cars over railroad tracks. But this story isn't about those. This story is about the roads you've never heard of, the roads hidden away in dark corners in small towns. There's just something so unnerving about them, something that can't really be described. It pulls people in, even those that don't want to go anywhere near it. Yeah, sometimes the hauntings can be explained away rather easily, but sometimes science fails and the mystery stays. There's more than one of these strange roads in my small town. I hate to admit it, but I've had personal experiences on both of them. I would love to say that I'm a skeptic, that I don't believe in the supernatural, but after what I've seen, I really don't have a choice. The road in this story has nothing to do with ghosts or completely explainable physics. No, this story is about someone or something changing the course of death itself. Let's call the road Cascade. Now, Cascade is, by all appearances, a normal road. It winds through residential lots before emptying out onto a rather busy highway. Pretty much, if I want to go anywhere on my side of this small town, I have to drive Cascade. I never minded though, because every time I drove Cascade, I got to see my favorite squirrel buddy. Yes, I'm that type of person. He's a melanistic squirrel that we named Loopy because, well, he is. He was often sighted running circles around tree trunks and completely failing to hide nuts. The potholes in the road are just never a good place. But if you caught him during a moment of stillness, he was absolutely amazing to look at. He's completely black from the tip of his twitchy nose to his fluffy tail. He's the first animal I ever saw afflicted by melanism. I know it's not normal, but it's gorgeous. So, when I saw Loopy as flat as a pancake on the road on my way to work one day, I was crushed. This beautiful, rare animal was dead, and in the worst way possible. I was upset for personal reasons too. Seeing him like that once was hard enough, but for the next 5 days I'd have to see him over and over again. Our little town isn't very quick about cleaning up roadkill. Their minimum is pretty much 5 days. Imagine my surprise when I didn't see Loopy on my drive home. There was no sign he had ever been there. There was no fur or blood left on the road. There wasn't even a darkening on the pavement. I was pretty impressed with the road crew. Apparently, they were finally upping their game. So, after avoiding a pothole big enough to swallow my car, I made my way home and didn't think about it anymore. It wasn't until that weekend, while I was on my afternoon walk, that I was given the shock of my life. I was bent down, picking up a strangely shaped rock, when none other than Loopy came exploding out of the tree above me, falling just like he'd planned it into a pile of leaves. You're probably asking now, how can you know it was the same squirrel? Well, other than being completely crazy, Loopy was blind in one eye. It was unmistakable, something that had probably happened early in his life. So, no, there was no doubt in my mind that this pure black squirrel was the one and only Loopy. As strange as it was, I tried to brush it off. It was early when I thought I'd seen Loopy run over. Maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe the blood had made a normal brown squirrel look black enough to be mistaken for Loopy. I just said my hello and continued on my way, though I was shaken. I had even told my parents about seeing Loopy. Now they were going to think I was insane. Now, if it had just been a single incident, I wouldn't be here writing this story. Thinking I saw Loopy dead, then seeing him alive was nothing compared to what happened next. I was, once again, driving Cascade when I heard a strange noise. Now I know that it's a noise that a deer makes, but at that time I was a little unnerved. It had been a perfectly nice, warm summer night up until that point. Up until I turned Dead Man's Curve and nearly ran into a herd of deer. There was a countless number of glowing, yellow eyes suddenly looking back at me and not moving an inch from where they were. My brakes squealed as my, admittedly, junker of a car fought to stop. It was so eerie, none of them moved. Usually, when you come upon a deer and make any type of noise, they run away with their tails held high. But these deer were looking at me like they'd attack me if I dared to come any closer. Seeing as I was in a convertible, I wasn't going to take the chance. It was then that the deer shifted just enough for me to see why they were guarding the road so intently. There was a fawn in the middle of the road. It couldn't have been very old at all. It was laying on its side, its abdomen flattened like someone had taken a club to the middle of a cake. It was one of the most heart-wrenching, disgusting things I had ever seen. Even to this day, having taken part in more than one dissection, it's still the worst thing I've ever witnessed. I had to close my eyes against the blood and entrails, against the meaningless death of a baby animal. It was then that I heard that haunting noise again, one I still can't think of a single word to describe. It made my stomach drop in a way that hasn't happened since. I wasn't sick, but I was just on the edge of it. Like any sudden movement would have me losing my dinner all over the pavement. I opened my eyes. I wonder, to this day, how my life would be different if I had never opened my eyes. If I'd never seen it happen. But the past is in the past, and now all I can do is hope I stop seeing it every night when I go to bed. Just as my eyes focused, I was able to see the fawn's abdomen begin to move. I know that deer are notorious for playing dead, but there was no way that baby was surviving that. As I watched, the deer's abdomen inflated like a balloon slowly being filled with helium. The blood on the pavement began to disappear, the entrails slowly retreating inside the animal's body, as if the rewind button had been pressed and the incident that had killed the fawn was being undone. It was a matter of seconds, no more than a minute, before it didn't look like anything had ever happened. The deer broke their steely-eyed gaze and turned away as the fawn stood on shaky legs and stumbled off the road. Soon they had all disappeared into the woods, and nothing was left but my word saying that a deer had come back to life. So I never told anyone. After the incident with Loopy, I just decided to keep it to myself. I didn't want to get those sympathetic looks, like everyone thought I was slipping into psychosis. It wasn't the last time I saw a dead animal disappear on Cascade, though I never saw whatever it was happen again. I never want to see it again. All I know is that something is playing with life and death, and I pray that I never become one of its toys. My imaginary friends. As a child, I had multiple imaginary friends. It wasn't ever something that my parents or I worried about, to tell you the truth. Imaginary friends were a sign of a healthy, developing mind for a child, after all. I had imaginary friends all over the house. There was the dirt-covered little boy in the basement, the robust African-American maid that patrolled the kitchen, dining room, and living room, as well as the people in the hallway walls that I heard but never saw, except for strands of soft white hair whenever the plaster broke. There were even children in the crawl spaces in the attic who loved to come out and play, and horses in the garage that I sometimes heard running down the alley beside my house, followed by frantic stable hands. But this story isn't about any of them. This story is about my closest imaginary friend, my best friend, who lived in my bedroom with me for most of my childhood. I actually had 3 imaginary friends that lived with me in my bedroom. Well, 4 if you count the mermaid under the floor tiles, but I never did. She only showed up in my bedroom. I don't think she really lived there. In order to tell you his story, I need to tell you theirs. My best friend was the one that I saw the most often. Out of all my imaginary friends, he was always there. The others came and went, but he never did. Every night, he would be there, long and lanky, leaning up against my dresser and just watching me. He thrilled me with stories of the past and the future and protected me when my other imaginary friends frightened me. He kept me safe when the giants peered in my windows and taught me how not to be afraid of the dark. I never really thought about how strange he was. I was a 7-year-old child, after all. But thinking back on it now, he was not proportioned correctly. He had long arms and legs. They weren't slightly long either. They were freakishly long. As a child, I brushed it off as everyone looking different. But if I saw him now, I'd be grabbing the crucifixes and holy water. I had this huge double dresser that stood at least 4 feet high with 5 drawers on either side. It was his perch. He would lean against it every night, his hip against the top drawer and his arms draped over the blankets on top. He would watch me no matter where I went in my room. Like his arms and legs, his neck was too long and could turn around completely. Thinking about it now, I don't know how he didn't scare the pee out of me as a kid. But he had a kind face and a gentle voice. I can't tell you what he looked like, just that he felt calming, and I always felt better when he was there with me. Other than him, there were 2 imaginary friends that were always present in my room. There was the woman in the fan and the girl in the closet. I will admit to you right now, the woman in the fan scared me out of my little mind. I had this huge box fan that I used during the summer, and every night I turned it on, she would appear. Well, her head would appear, her hair blowing the wrong way and her eyes staring into my soul. She would tell me to do bad things and scream at night to scare me awake. One night, I just couldn't take it anymore, and ended up hauling the fan into my parents' room with tears in my eyes. The fan lady had told me to crawl out my window onto the roof and jump off. My bedroom was on the second floor. I was pretty sure that would hurt me. So, being the brat that I was, I asked through tears if I could throw the fan out the window. Obviously, my parents said no, but told me they would keep the fan in their room until the mean lady was gone. The next morning, my dad called off work sick, but I didn't think anything of it. I was constantly trying to play hooky, so I just figured that was what he was doing. But now I know it wasn't. 2 weeks later, my parents bought me a brand new fan, and my dad wasn't sick anymore. I don't know what happened to the box fan. I never thought to ask. The third imaginary friend was just there. She lived in my closet. Now, I didn't have a huge closet, but to me as a child, it was enormous. It was only a little bigger than a normal closet, not walk-in by any means. About 3 feet up, I had a rod that I hung all my dresses and skirts on. Above that, it had 3 big shelves that I stored all sorts of things on. I could step into my closet and comfortably close the door behind me. It was in that area that she floated. She was wearing a long white gown. I called it many things, including a marshmallow, a cloud, and even a pillow. Now I know that it was a wedding dress. She just floated in my closet, swaying back and forth. I never saw all of her. Her head was above the doorframe, so I only saw her from her chest down. To tell you the truth, I can't even be sure that she had a head. She never said a word. She just floated there and swayed back and forth. Those were the only 3 that took up residence in my bedroom. The others stuck to their parts of the house, never straying into others. I didn't see that as strange as a kid, but now it kind of irks me. If they really were my imaginary friends, shouldn't I have been able to take them anywhere? Shouldn't I have been the one to choose where they appeared? I think I understand why I couldn't now. Years passed after the fan incident with no change. I was 10 years old, maybe 11, before my intellectual mind kicked in and told me that I was too old for imaginary friends. It was easy enough for me to black out most of them. The maid downstairs disappeared first, then the horses outside and the stable hands. It was harder with the children, but the little boy in the basement vanished, and so did the woman in my closet. But I couldn't get rid of my best friend. Looking back now, I find it strange that I never named him. I never named any of them. My parents would ask me their names, but I would always just shrug and say that I didn't know. To this day, I only know him as my best friend, though there's no way I would call him that anymore, not after what happened. However, before I can tell you that part of the story, I need to tell you how it came about. I was 13 before I became frustrated with my best friend. I remember my exact age because the incident happened right after I'd been accepted into the tag program in school. By that time, my realistic side had taken over, and I was cultivating more worthwhile skills than being able to juggle multiple imaginary friends. By that time, he was the only one left. Even the children in the attic had stopped giggling and asking me to play almost a year earlier. It was on Easter that I had finally had enough. I had done everything I could think of to get rid of him. I had told myself that he wasn't real, that he wasn't actually there, and that I would open my eyes and he would be gone, but it never worked. Every night he was still there, whispering his soft stories and leaning up against my dresser like he belonged there. I ignored him as best I could, but it didn't always work. I was worried. As a child, imaginary friends were a sign of a healthy mind. But as a teenager, they were a sign of schizophrenia. So, while getting changed into my Easter dress, I gave him an ultimatum. Either he left, or I made him leave. I didn't know how I would do that, but I knew that it could be done. He was a figment of my imagination. I could get rid of him if I wanted to. It was the first time in my life that he'd ever said no to me. And, calling upon the temper that I had inherited from my mother, I decided to make well on my threat. I don't know what made me grab that box, other than the fact that he'd always seemed to have a particular dislike for it. Every time I put it on top of my dresser, it ended up on the floor. I opened it up, emptied it out, and thrust it at him, telling him to go away, God help me, before slamming the lid closed and turning the cross-shaped latch. When I looked up, he was gone. Life went on normally after that. Nothing really changed other than I suddenly developed an agonizing fear of the attic, a place where I had used to spend hours playing before. It wasn't until recently that I really thought about it and remembered that, before joining my parents for Easter egg hunting that year, I had thrown the carved wooden box into the furthest corner of the attic and left it there. As I matured into a teenager, I didn't have any reason to go into the attic. I was busy with school, a boyfriend, and my band, so I ignored my fear. The attic was a mess of discarded furniture and toys anyway. The next time I would go up there would just be to clean it out. When I turned 18, my parents moved out of the house, leaving it in all its 3-story farmhouse glory to me. I immediately moved my real best friend, Tasha, in for help with rent and taking care of the house. Plus, I just wanted to live with my best friend. Who wouldn't want to live with their best friend? I moved into my parents' room and she moved into mine. My sister's room, which held the door to the attic, was turned into a home office and gaming room. Really, we had it good. That was when weird things started to happen. The first night that we spent at the house together, we both fell asleep in my new room, the one which used to be my parents'. However, we were quickly awoken by what sounded like the front door slamming open. After finding out that that wasn't the case, we searched the house to see what had happened, and found the attic door still swinging on its hinges. I assured Tasha that there was nothing strange about it. My sister had often complained of the door coming open when the wind blew outside, and seeing as it sounded like there was roaring in the attic, that had to have been what had caused it. Thankfully, my sister had left the padded headboard that she used to stop the attic door from slamming against the wall, so we just sat that up, closed the door, and went back to bed. At this time, we were both still brand new adults and hadn't been jaded by the world of the supernatural. I grew up in a household so Christian that I couldn't even hold a boy's hand, and she grew up in one where her parents just didn't care to teach her anything. So we had no idea that something otherworldly might be going on. The strange occurrences persisted, however, especially after she moved from my room into my old one. She came to me one night asking why I had a wedding dress in the closet, and why none of the doors in this house would stay shut. That was when I started to feel something was wrong. After showing her that I clearly did not have a wedding dress in the closet and latching the door, I went to bed, thinking more about the imaginary friends I had banished when I was young. But those thoughts soon faded, and 6 months later, we'd gotten used to the doors opening, the stairs creaking, the constant sound of wind in the attic. I wish I could say that that was the end of the story. I wish I could say that we lived happily ever after and nothing ever went wrong. But no, that isn't what happened. Being the spoiled children that we were, neither of us had a job. We were living off my parents' money in the house that they still owned but said was mine. So, in an effort to give back to them, we decided we were going to clean up the house. We started from the bottom up. My best friend hated the basement. There was a patch under the stairs where she wouldn't even go. The whole basement was sealed, but she always said it felt like a mound of dirt, and we shouldn't go there. So we didn't. It was hidden anyway. It didn't need to be cleaned. Cleaning the first and second story was a breeze. It was our living area, so it wasn't bad anyway. It was only when we opened the door to the attic that we'd wedged shut that everything seemed to start spiraling. The attic was filled with junk, more than I remember being there the last time that I had gone up the stairs. We devised a plan. We were going to start at the top of the stairs and make our way inwards. Whatever we wanted to keep would be put to the side, and the rest would be thrown out the window into the dumpster waiting below. It worked pretty well, actually. I reminisced over old toys and clothing, and she teased me about my affinity for Barbie dolls and Polly Pockets. I was still uncomfortable, but by that time I'd nearly forgotten why the attic scared me so much when I was younger. As we cleared more and more out, it was apparent that it was just wasted space that we could be using for better things than storing old junk. We made grand plans of moving the office and gaming center up into the attic and getting a third roommate who would make living in the place even easier. It was all great fun. We didn't have any mishaps until we were moving old mattresses and ended up completely demolishing a shelf. Before I knew it, I had stumbled backwards and stepped on something that made the worst cracking sound, like bones being crushed under the weight of a car. Whatever it was wood that ended up slicing into the tender ball of my foot. Yes, it's very stupid to clean without shoes on. I didn't even recognize it then. It was just a tiny wooden box with a rusted frost latch. We threw it out the window into the dumpster like it was no big deal. But I remember it now. I'm sure you've all already figured it out. It was the same carved wooden box that I had thrust at my best friend when I told him to go away. And now it had my blood. If I had known then what I know now, I would have taken it straight to the fire pit and roasted it. Burned it to ashes, no matter how bad my foot hurt. But now, I just limped downstairs with a little help, bandaged my foot up, and called off cleaning for the night. That was the night when everything changed. The roaring in the attic started to sound more like screaming. It sounded like there was someone up there throwing boxes and slamming into the walls. I could even hear the terrified crying of children, though I knew there were none there. It scared me enough that I called the police. Tasha hadn't heard a thing, but I had, and I knew there was something wrong. But the police sided with her and said that there was nothing in the attic but a mess, and left us with a warning not to call unless there was a real emergency. It was almost a week before we went up again, mostly because of me. I said it was because my foot hurt, but it was because I was terrified again. There was something up there, the same darkness that had scared me for years, and it seemed like I was still the only one that could see it. But as soon as we reached the landing, I was proven right. The attic was trashed. All the neat piles we made had been torn apart. The old desk we'd saved to use as video console storage had been upended, one shoved right up against each crawl space and wedged in so that nothing could get in or out. The old dresser we'd left for clothing overflow had been pulled away from the wall, all the drawers yanked out and thrown across the room. Even the old baby clothes we'd kept had been torn or thrown into the furthest reaches of the attic. But the worst of all, right in the middle of the only clean area left on the floor, was that little wooden box, crushed by my foot and still stained with my blood. At that moment, we both knew that we were dealing with something that we didn't stand a chance against. It wasn't long after that Tasha moved out. She'd met a boy at college and decided to go live with him instead. She wanted out of town and away from her parents, but I also think she wanted out of that house. Hell, I wanted out of that house. But I still wanted to be independent, so I stuck it out. I had a job now, and I was paying rent. I'd purchased my own car. I wasn't gonna let some stupid wooden box chase me out of my childhood home. It wasn't the wooden box that made me leave. I got sick. Very sick. It was so bad that I couldn't go to work. I couldn't get out of bed without getting dizzy or throwing up. A 3-day trip to the hospital showed that my kidneys were shutting down for no apparent reason, and I needed to be supervised while I recovered. It wasn't long after that I moved back in with my parents. I had to sleep on a mattress on the living room floor, but after my first night there, I felt better than I had in months. My cat even looked better and more lively. I didn't have an answer for what had happened, but I was glad that it seemed to be over. Sadly, during recovery, I lost my job and the axle of my car broke, so I ended up staying with my parents longer than I originally intended. A lot happened in that time, but long story short, the money that they used to comfortably pay for 2 houses was no longer there, and my childhood home ended up being put into foreclosure. I'll spare you the details of our fight with the bank that we lost, the lawsuit that we lost. Just know that we were told that we had 3 days to get our stuff out of the house before they changed the locks. 3 days is not a long time to clean out a 3-bedroom farmhouse. We enlisted help, but even at the end of 3 days, we'd only gotten the basement, first story, and second story cleaned out. The attic hadn't been touched. The sun was just going down, the house falling into shadows as we walked through for the last time, making sure we'd taken everything we would miss. We had to leave so much of our lives there, but we had no choice. Staying any longer would have been a criminal offense. The second story was completely empty, so I was walking around the first story, standing in front of the stairs and looking at a porcelain doll when I heard something bouncing down the stairs. I turned just in time to be hit by a ball, a small, faded, bouncing ball. I know that they say curiosity killed the cat, but I had to figure out where it came from, so I rushed up the stairs, inexplicably led straight to the attic door that had been closed and bolted shut by the realtor. A brand new, shiny door handle that would stop the problem of it opening had just been installed the day before. But still, there it stood, wide open. The wood frame of the door cracked and pushed out like someone had slammed into it from the inside. I knew it was stupid, but I knew that ball had to come from the attic. So even as the light faded, I made my way up the stairs, needing to make sure that there was nothing there that had caused it. I don't know if I thought an animal had gotten in or something, but I was drawn into the attic like I couldn't stop myself. What I saw standing at the top of those stairs is still etched into my mind today. It was the darkness, the pitch black that had haunted my dreams for years. But for the first time, I saw something inside it. A faint outline, just barely there as the sun fell beyond the horizon. The outline of a teenage boy, with unnaturally long arms and legs, and a head turned the wrong way. I would like to say that I was smart enough to turn tail and run, that I knew when I was beaten, but I've always been a little full of myself, so I stood there, yelling at this thing. I asked why he'd torture me, why he hated me now. I yelled until the light disappeared and his outline did too. It was just inky blackness then, the type of black that you can't see anything through. But I stood my ground, upset at losing my childhood home, upset that someone or something that I had trusted had caused me so much pain. I stood there until the darkness suddenly advanced. It was then that my flight instinct kicked in, and I stumbled down the stairs like a clumsy video game character running from a cloud of poison. I could hear him, that gentle voice that had lulled me to sleep so many times before, as I ran down the creaky stairs. He was asking me to stay, telling me that we belonged together. But I knew then that he'd never been something good. So I kept running, and for the first time he raised his voice at me, yelling that we'd never be apart, just as I slammed the front door. Making my way home after that, I couldn't explain to my parents why I was so shaken. My mom was asking me about the ball, but I couldn't answer. I couldn't explain to her what had happened in the attic. She joked that maybe something hadn't wanted us to leave. But it's no joke. To this day, nearly 6 years later, I still feel drawn to that house. Even as it changes owners and appearances, I still want to drive to it every day and go inside. It's taken over my dreams and my nightmares. I want to go back. And I don't know how much longer I can stop myself. And there we have it. The end. I will leave it up to you if you believe these stories to be true or not. That is my special little secret. These are the only 2 standalone spooky stories that I have written. The others are tied together in anthologies that I am working very, very, very slowly on writing. If you enjoyed this type of video, let me know. Maybe I can do more in the future. If you like my videos, don't forget to leave a like, comment, or even a subscribe. I would love to see you become part of this little community that we are building. As a reminder, subscriber requests are still open. If you have a request, leave a comment and I will get back to you. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.